Before the story begins, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. These stories are crafted to take you deep into worlds of power, love, and unexpected destiny, so don't miss a single chapter. In the city of New York, power didn't belong to politicians or celebrities. It belonged to Adrian Moretti. His name was never spoken loudly. Not in restaurants. Not in nightclubs. Not even in private offices. Adrian Moretti was the kind of man people referred to with a pause, a lowered voice, and a careful glance over the shoulder. He was the kingpin behind half the city's shadow economy, calm, controlled, and untouchable. At 38, Adrian had everything men usually chased their entire lives: money, loyalty, fear, and influence. But what he didn't have was something far simpler. Someone real. That night, Adrian stood alone in his penthouse, staring out at the glowing skyline. The city looked alive, busy, hopeful, full of connection. Yet he felt completely disconnected from it. His phone buzzed. A reminder. The Blackwell Gala. An elite charity event where appearances mattered more than truth. Politicians, business leaders, and enemies disguised as friends would all be there. And for the first time, Adrian was expected to arrive with a companion. Not a mistress. Not an escort. Someone believable. Adrian exhaled slowly and turned away from the window. That's when he heard the soft sound of movement behind him. Mr. Moretti, I'm done cleaning the office. He turned. Her name was Elena Carter. She had been working in the building for almost a year. Quiet. Professional. Invisible, at least to most people. She was in her mid-20s, with thoughtful eyes and a calm presence that didn't beg for attention. She wore no expensive clothes, no makeup meant to impress, and she never lingered longer than necessary. But tonight, Adrian noticed her. Not because of beauty alone, though she was beautiful in a simple, honest way, but because of the way she looked at him. No fear. No fascination. Just respect. Thank you, Adrian said. Elena nodded and turned to leave. Wait. She paused. Yes, sir. Adrian hesitated. He wasn't used to hesitation. Deals, orders, consequences, those came easily. But this was different. I need to ask you something, he said carefully. And you're free to say no. That caught her off guard. She faced him fully now. Okay. There's an event tonight, Adrian continued. A public one. I need a date. Someone who can act natural. Confident. Real. Elena blinked, clearly confused. I don't understand. I'm offering you $5,000, he said evenly. For one evening. No expectations beyond appearing with me. Conversation. Presence. The silence stretched between them. Elena felt her heart pounding, not from excitement, but shock. $5,000 could change everything for her right now. Rent. Bills. Her younger brother's tuition. But she also knew who Adrian Moretti was. I'm not that kind of woman, she said quietly. Adrian's expression didn't change. Neither am I that kind of man. This isn't what you think. She studied his face, searching for something dangerous. Something dishonest. She didn't find it. Just one night. She asked. One night, he confirmed. You leave when it ends. No strings. Elena took a breath. All right, she said. I'll do it. 2 hours later, Elena stood in front of a mirror in a borrowed dress, simple, elegant, and far beyond anything she owned. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the necklace. When Adrian saw her, he froze. Not because she looked expensive, but because she looked authentic. For the first time in years, he felt something unexpected. Nervous. As they arrived at the gala, whispers followed them. Eyes turned. People smiled too widely, pretending not to judge. Elena slipped her arm through his, just as he had instructed. You okay? She whispered. Adrian glanced at her, surprised by the concern in her voice. I should be asking you that. She smiled softly. I'll be fine. Throughout the night, Elena handled herself with grace. She listened more than she spoke. She laughed at the right moments. She asked real questions. And when people tried to intimidate her by association, she stood steady. Adrian watched it all. And for the first time, he forgot this was an arrangement. By the end of the night, as the city lights reflected in the car window, Adrian realized something dangerous. He hadn't just bought her time. He had invited her into a world she didn't belong to, and he wasn't sure he wanted her to leave. Adrian Moretti sat in the back seat of his black luxury car, the city sliding past the tinted windows like a distant memory, yet his attention was fixed on the woman beside him. Elena sat upright, hands folded neatly in her lap, the soft glow of the streetlights brushing across her face. The gala was over, the deal fulfilled, and yet the silence between them felt heavier than any unspoken threat Adrian had ever faced. He had spent his life controlling rooms, men, entire systems, but this quiet, honest presence beside him unsettled him in a way bullets never could. He cleared his throat, intending to say something formal, something final, but the words stalled. Elena sensed it. She turned slightly, meeting his gaze without fear. "So," she said gently, "that was your world for tonight." Adrian nodded. "And you handled it better than most people born into it." She offered a small smile, the kind that didn't ask for praise. The car slowed as they approached her apartment building, a modest structure far removed from the skyline views of his penthouse. Adrian felt a strange tightening in his chest as he realized this was where the night should end. He reached into his jacket, pulling out an envelope. "As promised," he said. Elena accepted it but didn't open it. "Thank you," she replied. Then, after a pause, "for being respectful." The word struck him harder than any insult ever had. Respect was something people rarely associated with his name. She opened the door, hesitated, then looked back. "Good night, Mr. Moretti." He watched her disappear inside, and for the first time in years, he didn't immediately give the driver another order. He simply sat there, replaying the night in his mind, her laughter, her thoughtful questions, the way she spoke to powerful men without shrinking. When he finally returned home, sleep refused to come. Instead, memories of Elena filled the empty rooms of his penthouse. The next morning, Adrian arrived at his office earlier than usual. His lieutenant, Marco, noticed immediately. "Big night?" Marco asked carefully. Adrian didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the hallway outside his office, an absurd thought crossing his mind. He wondered if Elena would be cleaning today. Hours passed. He found himself distracted during meetings, his focus drifting, his patience thinner than usual. When a minor associate made a mistake, Adrian waved him off instead of punishing him. Marco raised an eyebrow. "You okay, boss?" Adrian finally spoke. "Find out everything you can about Elena Carter," he said. Marco stiffened. "Is she a problem?" Adrian shook his head. "No. That's the problem." Meanwhile, Elena sat at her kitchen table, staring at the envelope she had finally opened. $5,000. Real. Heavy. Life-changing. She should have felt relieved, even excited, but instead she felt unsettled. The night had awakened something she hadn't expected, a sense of being seen. Not as help. Not as invisible labor. But as a woman whose thoughts mattered. She tried to shake it off. People like Adrian Moretti didn't cross into lives like hers without consequences. At work that afternoon, she cleaned quietly, just as she always had. When she entered Adrian's office, she froze. He was there, standing by the window, hands in his pockets. "I didn't expect to see you today," she said carefully. "I didn't expect to feel this way either," he replied before he could stop himself. He turned to face her. The air between them tightened. "Elena, I want to be clear," he continued. "Last night is over. You owe me nothing." She nodded. "I understand." But neither of them moved. Adrian took a breath. "Still, I'd like to see you again. Not as an arrangement. As dinner. Public place. No pressure." Elena searched his face, weighing caution against curiosity. She had spent her life choosing safety over risk. But something in his voice, uncertain, almost vulnerable, made her pause. "I'll think about it," she said. That was more than he expected. Days passed. Adrian found himself waiting, something he had never done for anyone. When Elena finally agreed, setting clear boundaries, he felt a quiet victory he didn't fully understand. Their dinner was simple. No bodyguards nearby. No lavish display. Just conversation. They talked about childhood dreams, about regrets, about how power could isolate a person just as deeply as poverty. Elena spoke about caring for her brother after their parents died, about learning strength through responsibility. Adrian listened, truly listened, and something shifted inside him. He realized that with Elena, he didn't need to perform. He could just exist. But as the night ended, danger loomed unseen. Marco watched from a distance, concern etched on his face. The world Adrian ruled did not allow weakness. And Elena, pure, honest, unguarded, was becoming exactly that. As Adrian walked her to her door, he stopped short of touching her hand. I won't pretend I don't want more, he said quietly. But I won't cross your lines. Elena met his eyes, heart racing. Then don't, she replied softly. As she closed the door behind her, both of them felt it, the truth neither dared to say out loud. One night had turned into something far more dangerous than desire. It had become connection. And in Adrian Moretti's world, that was the most powerful, and fragile, thing of all. The days following their second dinner unfolded with an unfamiliar rhythm in Adrian Moretti's life, a rhythm not dictated by meetings, threats, or territory disputes, but by anticipation. He caught himself checking his phone more often than necessary, rereading Elena's brief, polite messages, each one grounded and careful, as if she sensed how easily things could tip out of balance. For Elena, the feeling was just as unsettling. She returned to her routines, early mornings, long shifts, quiet evenings, but now there was a presence in her thoughts she could not ignore. Adrian wasn't supposed to fit into her world, yet he had begun to, slipping into her awareness in small, persistent ways. When they met again, it was by her choice this time. A walk through a public park on a Sunday afternoon, children laughing nearby, ordinary life unfolding all around them. Adrian arrived without his usual sharp suit, dressed simply, almost anonymously, and Elena noticed immediately. You look different, she said. He smiled faintly. So do you. You're relaxed. They walked side by side, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. For Adrian, it felt like stepping into a life he'd never believed was possible, one where people didn't fear him, where no one wanted anything except honesty. But even as he enjoyed the moment, the shadow of his world followed closely behind. Across the city, Marco sat in a dim office with two other trusted men, voices low. He's distracted, one of them said. He's meeting her in public. Marco didn't respond immediately. Loyalty had always been simple for him, protect Adrian at all costs, but now the threat was not external. It was emotional. We don't interfere, Marco finally said. Unless someone else does first. That warning came sooner than expected. Elena felt it one evening as she walked home from work, the subtle sense of being watched, footsteps slowing when she slowed, stopping when she stopped. Her heart raced, but she kept moving, refusing to panic. When she reached her building, a man's voice stopped her. Elena Carter. She turned sharply. The man was well dressed, polite, his smile rehearsed. Who are you? She asked. A friend, he replied. Of Mr. Moretti's. Fear flickered through her, quickly replaced by resolve. Then you should talk to him, not me. The man's smile thinned. Some people don't like change, he said. Especially when it involves weakness. Elena held his gaze. I'm not his weakness, she said quietly. I'm not anything to him. The man studied her for a long moment, then stepped back. For your sake, he said, I hope that's true. He walked away, leaving Elena shaken but unbroken. She didn't call Adrian that night. She needed to think, to understand what she might be stepping into. Adrian, meanwhile, sensed the distance immediately. He knew silence as well as anyone. He'd used it as a weapon, but this silence felt different. When Elena finally agreed to meet, it was at a small cafe, her expression serious. She told him everything. Adrian listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with every word. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. This is exactly what I was trying to protect you from, he said. Then maybe you shouldn't be near me, Elena replied. The words hurt more than any threat ever could. That's not what I want, he said. But it might be what's safest for you. She shook her head. You don't get to decide that alone. Her courage stunned him. No one had ever challenged him like this, not without fear, not without an agenda. I won't be controlled, she continued. Not by your enemies. And not by you. Adrian realized then that what he felt wasn't possession or obsession. It was respect, deep and undeniable. If you walk away, he said quietly, I'll let you. I won't follow. I won't interfere. Elena searched his face, looking for manipulation, for dominance. She found none. Only restraint. And if I stay? She asked. Then I'll do everything in my power to keep my world from touching yours, he replied. Even if that costs me. The truth of that statement settled heavily between them. Elena looked down at her hands, then back up. I won't pretend I'm not scared, she said. But I won't pretend this doesn't matter either. They sat in silence, the cafe noise fading into the background. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that two lives were balancing on a fragile line. Neither of them reached for the other. They didn't need to. The choice had been made, not for certainty, not for safety, but for honesty. And somewhere in the shadows of New York, forces were already shifting, reacting to the Kingpin who was beginning to change. Adrian Moretti had built his empire on control, but now he was learning something far more dangerous. Love did not obey rules. And once it took hold, there was no turning back. Adrian Moretti had always believed that distance was protection, that walls, emotional or otherwise, kept chaos at bay, yet in the weeks that followed his conversation with Elena, he realized how fragile that belief truly was. He tried to pull back, to return to the rigid structure that had defined his life, but the effort felt forced, unnatural, as if he were pretending to be someone he no longer fully recognized. Elena, on the other hand, moved through her days with a sharpened awareness, conscious now of every unfamiliar face, every car that lingered too long on her street, yet she refused to let fear dictate her choices. They continued seeing each other carefully, deliberately choosing public spaces, ordinary moments that felt almost rebellious against the dark expectations surrounding Adrian's name. He found himself laughing more easily, listening more deeply, discovering how much of himself he had buried under responsibility and power. But his enemies were not blind. In the undercurrent of the city's criminal world, whispers spread that Adrian was distracted, softened, changed, and change was something rivals exploited without mercy. Marco noticed the shift in alliances first, missed meetings, delayed responses, subtle challenges testing boundaries that had once been unquestionable. He confronted Adrian late one night. This isn't just about territory anymore, Marco warned. They think you've got something to lose. Adrian didn't deny it. I do, he said calmly. And I won't pretend otherwise. Marco's loyalty wavered between concern and respect. Then protect it, he urged. Protection, however, demanded choices. When Elena's brother, Lucas, fell ill unexpectedly, Elena spent long nights at the hospital, exhausted but determined. Adrian wanted to step in, to use his resources, but he held back, honoring her independence. Instead, he sat beside her in waiting rooms, silent support rather than control. It was there, under fluorescent lights and the quiet hum of machines, that Elena saw a side of him no one else ever had, patient, vulnerable, human. She realized then that Adrian wasn't trying to own her, he was trying to learn how to deserve her. But fate rarely allowed peace to last. One evening, as Adrian left a meeting with a rival faction, an attack erupted without warning, not bullets, but strategy. His financial channels were frozen, shipments intercepted, alliances fractured overnight. It was a calculated move meant to destabilize him without drawing public attention. Adrian understood the message clearly. Step back into line, or lose everything. At the same time, Elena received a visit at work. Not from a stranger this time, but from a woman. Elegant, cold, and unmistakably dangerous. You're causing trouble, the woman said quietly. Men like Adrian Moretti don't get second chances. Elena met her gaze. I didn't ask for this. The woman's smile was thin. No one ever does. She left without another word, but the warning lingered. Elena told Adrian immediately. He reacted not with anger, but resolve. This ends now, he said. I won't let them use you as leverage. Elena felt a familiar surge of defiance. And I won't disappear to make your life easier. The tension between protection and partnership reached a breaking point. Adrian faced his world head on, calling a meeting that hadn't happened in years. Leaders, rivals, allies all brought into one room under a fragile truce. He stood before them, composed, unwavering. My personal life is not a weakness, he declared. Interfere again, and the consequences will be permanent. Some scoffed. Some listened. Everyone understood he meant every word. Yet even as Adrian reasserted control, the cost was heavy. The attack on his operations forced him to make sacrifices, relinquishing certain territories to stabilize the rest. Power shifted, balances changed, and for the first time, Adrian chose restraint over domination. Elena saw the toll it took on him, the weight of leadership pressing harder than ever. One night, standing on her apartment balcony, she asked the question neither of them had voiced. If this becomes too much, she said softly, will you let me go? Adrian didn't answer immediately. He watched the city lights flicker below, the empire he had built stretching endlessly in every direction. If staying means destroying what makes you who you are, he said finally, then yes. The honesty in his voice both comforted and frightened her. They stood there, not touching, yet closer than ever. The world around them was tightening, lines being drawn, patience wearing thin. Love had entered a space where it was never meant to survive, and both of them knew the next move would define everything. As the night deepened, Adrian made a silent vow, not to control fate, but to face it. Whether it led to redemption or ruin, he would no longer run from what his heart had claimed. And in the shadows, unseen forces prepared for the final test of a kingpin who had dared to change. The pressure that had been building around Adrian Moretti finally began to harden into something unmistakable, something that could no longer be ignored or negotiated away, and he felt it in every conversation, every delayed response, every sudden shift in loyalty among men who had once sworn absolute allegiance. Power, he knew, was like ice, solid only as long as the temperature remained stable, and his world was warming fast. Elena sensed the change too, even without seeing the full picture. Adrian grew quieter, more guarded, his eyes constantly assessing exits and angles, his mind never fully at rest. Yet when he was with her, he tried to soften, to shield her from the storm gathering just beyond reach. One evening, he asked her to take a walk with him along the river, a place far removed from his usual territory. The city lights reflected on the water, distorted and trembling, much like the life he was now trying to balance. I need to tell you something, he said, stopping near the railing. Elena turned to him, already bracing herself. There's going to be a shift, he continued. In my world. I can't promise it will be clean or quiet, but I can promise I won't lie to you. She appreciated that more than grand assurances. I don't need safety, she replied. I need truth. Adrian nodded. The truth, however, came faster than either expected. The next morning, Marco arrived at Adrian's office with urgency etched into his face. They've made their move, he said. A rival syndicate, sensing vulnerability, had formed a temporary alliance, aiming to force Adrian out by isolating him completely, financially, politically, and socially. It was a classic tactic. Remove the crown without drawing blood. Adrian listened carefully, weighing options. He could strike back hard, reassert dominance through fear, but that would drag Elena directly into the line of fire. Or he could do something no one anticipated, step back strategically, dismantle parts of his own empire before others could seize them, and expose corruption that would make continued conflict too costly for his enemies. It was risky, potentially humiliating, but it would protect the people he cared about. He chose the latter. Elena learned about the decision not from rumors, but from Adrian himself. He came to her apartment that night, exhaustion lining his face. I'm giving up control of certain operations, he said simply. I'm changing the structure. She searched his eyes. For me. He didn't deny it. For the chance of something real, he answered. The weight of that choice settled heavily between them. Elena understood what he was sacrificing, not just money or influence, but identity. He had built his life on being untouchable, and now he was choosing vulnerability. Days later, the consequences rippled outward. News broke of investigations, frozen assets, and sudden retirements within the criminal hierarchy. Adrian cooperated just enough to destabilize the network without fully destroying it, threading a dangerous needle between survival and surrender. Some called him strategic. Others called him weak. Elena watched from the sidelines, torn between admiration and guilt. She confronted him one night, voice steady but eyes shining. "You shouldn't have to erase yourself for me," she said. Adrian reached for her hand, stopping just short, giving her the choice. She closed the distance. "I'm not erasing myself," he replied. "I'm choosing who I want to be." The intimacy of that moment wasn't physical, it was something deeper, forged in trust. But the world refused to let them have peace. Marco warned Adrian that not everyone would accept the new order quietly. A final push was coming, one that would force a decisive end. Adrian prepared carefully, ensuring Elena and her brother would be safe, arranging contingencies without her knowledge. Elena sensed the distance growing again, the protective silence returning. When she confronted him, frustration broke through her calm. "You promised honesty," she said. Adrian held her gaze, torn. "And I promise you a future," he said. "Even if I'm not part of it." The words struck like a blow. "You don't get to decide that," she replied, echoing their earlier confrontation. This time, however, the stakes were higher. The final confrontation came not with violence, but exposure. Evidence Adrian had quietly collected was released, implicating key figures across rival factions. The fallout was immediate: arrests, public scandals, collapsed alliances. The old structure crumbled under its own weight. Adrian emerged diminished in power but free from constant warfare. Yet victory tasted bitter. In dismantling the world that had defined him, he stood at a crossroads with no clear path forward. Elena found him days later, alone in his penthouse, boxes stacked near the walls. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Adrian looked around the empty space. "Now," he said, "I find out who I am without all this." She stepped closer. "And us?" she asked. He hesitated, fear flickering across his face for the first time. The man who had faced empires without flinching was afraid of one answer. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, unaware that one of its most powerful figures had willingly stepped out of the shadows. The story was nearing its end, but the hardest question remained unanswered: could love survive when the empire that once protected it was gone? The silence that followed the collapse of Adrian Moretti's empire was unlike anything he had ever known, a deep, echoing quiet that pressed in on him from all sides, replacing the constant urgency that had once defined every waking moment. Without the endless calls, the meetings, the need to anticipate betrayal, time suddenly stretched long and unfamiliar. For the first time since his youth, Adrian woke up without a schedule written in survival. Elena noticed the change immediately. He moved slower, spoke less, and listened more, as if relearning how to exist without command or fear. They met often now, not in secretive corners or carefully chosen public spaces, but in ordinary places that once would have seemed meaningless to him. A small bookstore, a neighborhood cafe, the park where families gathered on weekends. Adrian found unexpected comfort in anonymity, in being just another man standing in line for coffee, and Elena found relief in seeing him breathe without the weight of the world on his shoulders. Yet beneath the calm, uncertainty lingered. The city still remembered his name, and not everyone believed his transformation. Old associates watched from a distance, unsure whether this retreat was permanent or merely strategic. Marco, who had remained loyal through everything, voiced the concern one evening as they walked through an empty warehouse that Adrian was in the process of selling. "You've stepped away," Marco said, "but the world you built doesn't disappear overnight." Adrian nodded. "I know. That's why I'm making it impossible to rebuild." Elena, meanwhile, faced her own reckoning. Friends noticed the change in her, the confidence that had grown quietly alongside her caution. She was no longer just surviving, she was choosing. Yet she struggled with guilt, questioning whether Adrian's sacrifices were too great a price for her presence in his life. One night, she voiced those doubts as they sat on her balcony, the city humming softly below. "What if you wake up one day and regret this?" she asked. Adrian considered the question carefully. I regret many things, he said. Losing you wouldn't be one of them. The sincerity in his voice left her breathless. Still, the future remained uncertain. Legal repercussions continued to ripple outward, and while Adrian had avoided the worst consequences, his freedom came with conditions, monitoring, restrictions, and a life lived under quiet scrutiny. He accepted it without complaint, seeing it as a necessary step towards something cleaner, something lasting. Elena stood by him through it all, attending hearings, waiting through long days, offering support without losing herself. Their bond deepened not through grand gestures, but through shared resilience. Then came the unexpected opportunity. A legitimate business partner approached Adrian with an offer, consulting, strategy, a chance to use his sharp mind in a lawful way. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't powerful in the way his old life had been, but it was honest. Adrian hesitated, afraid of stepping into another world he didn't fully understand. Elena encouraged him. You don't have to be who you were to be valuable, she said. He took the offer. Slowly, deliberately, Adrian began to rebuild. Not an empire, but a life. He learned to accept limits, to work within rules rather than bend them. The transition was difficult, humbling, but strangely freeing. As months passed, the constant threat faded into background noise. The city moved on, finding new figures to fear, new stories to tell. Adrian and Elena found themselves standing on steadier ground, though neither pretended the past had vanished. One evening, as they walked through the same park where they had once pretended to be strangers, Adrian stopped. I don't know what the future looks like, he said. I can't offer certainty. Elena smiled softly. Neither can I. But I'm not looking for certainty. She reached for his hand, this time without hesitation. The simple gesture carried more weight than any oath. Yet even as peace settled in, one final challenge remained, the internal reckoning. Adrian struggled with forgiveness, with accepting that he could move forward without erasing what he had done. Elena reminded him that growth did not require denial, only responsibility. Together, they faced the quiet days and the difficult nights, learning that love was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move through it side by side. As winter approached, the city changed, and so did they. What had begun as an arrangement had evolved into a partnership forged through loss, choice, and resilience. The night Adrian had bought her time felt like a distant echo now, replaced by something far more enduring. Yet one chapter remained unwritten, the moment when Adrian would fully step into a future not defined by his past. And as the year drew to a close, both of them sensed it was coming, the final turning point that would determine whether their story ended in quiet resolution or something even greater. The final turning point in Adrian Moretti's life arrived without drama or danger. No sirens or confrontations, but in a moment of quiet clarity that surprised him more than any threat ever had. It came on an ordinary morning as he stood in a modest office overlooking a street he had once controlled from the shadows, watching people hurry past with coffee cups and conversations, each of them free in ways he was only just beginning to understand. The consulting work he had taken on had grown steadily, built not on fear but on trust, and for the first time his influence created something rather than extracting it. Elena noticed the change before he did, the way his shoulders no longer carried constant tension, the way his eyes looked outward instead of constantly scanning for danger. Their lives had settled into a rhythm that felt honest, earned through patience and choice rather than obligation. Yet the past, though quieter, still lingered in memory, and Adrian knew he could not fully move forward without confronting it on his own terms. One evening, he asked Elena to walk with him through the city as dusk settled, retracing paths he had once ruled. They passed old landmarks of his former power, now just buildings among many, and with each step he felt something loosening inside him. When they reached a small bridge overlooking the river, he stopped and turned to her, expression thoughtful rather than troubled. I've spent my life being defined by what I controlled, he said. I don't want that to be my story anymore. Elena listened, her presence steady. Then tell a new one, she replied simply. The simplicity of her faith struck him deeply. He realized then that redemption was not a single act but a series of choices made consistently over time. Days later, Adrian made one final, deliberate move. He publicly stepped away from any remaining ties to his former network, transferring assets, closing doors, and speaking openly about accountability. It wasn't a confession designed to shock, but a statement meant to close a chapter. The reaction was mixed, but for the first time, Adrian felt no need to control the narrative. The story was no longer about power, it was about responsibility. Elena stood beside him through it all, not as a shield, but as a witness. When the dust settled, they found themselves standing in a place neither had expected when their paths first crossed, a future built not on fear or fantasy, but on shared intention. One quiet evening, back in the park where their journey had truly begun, Adrian took a breath and spoke without rehearsing, without strategy. I can't offer you a perfect life, he said. But I can offer you honesty, effort, and a future I choose every day. Elena met his gaze, eyes warm, unafraid. That's all I've ever wanted, she replied. There was no grand spectacle, no dramatic declaration, just the calm certainty of two people choosing each other with open eyes. As the seasons changed, they built a life that reflected who they had become: simple routines, shared responsibilities, mutual respect. Elena pursued opportunities she had once postponed, no longer shrinking herself to survive, and Adrian supported her not with control but encouragement. The city continued its endless cycle, new names rising, old ones fading, and Adrian Moretti became just another man walking its streets, known not for fear but for the quiet steadiness of his presence. Occasionally, someone would recognize him, glance twice, remember the legend he once was, but Adrian no longer felt the pull of that identity. His legacy was no longer written in whispers or warnings, but in the way he showed up every day. One night, as they sat together watching the city lights, Elena reflected on how far they had come. It's strange, she said softly. One night changed everything. Adrian smiled, taking her hand. It didn't change everything, he replied. It revealed it. The past remained a part of them, not as a chain, but as a lesson, proof that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to something real. Their story was never about a deal or a transaction, it was about choice, growth, and the courage to let go of who you were to become who you were meant to be. And in that truth, Adrian Moretti finally found what power had never given him: a life built on meaning, and a love that did not need to hide in the shadows.